This is an apartheid regime. This is an occupation. This is a subjugation of some people over the lives of others.
Durgham Mushtaha, a Palestinian. You moved to Ireland at the age of 8 and you are now raising funds for your remaining family members back home.
Not many people got killed, but some people did get killed. My cousin's 3 children got killed. When I spoke to him, he said, "Did you see the photograph that I sent you of my children?" I said, "Yeah, I did. Did you see how beautiful they were?" I said, "Yeah."
What sort of toll has this had on you?
This is a GK Media podcast.
Durgham Mushtaha, you moved to Ireland at the age of 8 and you are now raising funds for your remaining family members back home. Welcome to Garry Talks. Thank you for coming into GK Media Studios.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Yes, I am Palestinian Irish. I was born in Palestine, as was my sister. My brother was actually born in Ireland to a Palestinian father and an Irish mother. So I'm half. I spent the first few years of my life, about 8 years altogether, in Palestine, and then moved to Ireland and grew up the rest of my life here.
Let's go back to your early childhood to find a moment for so many of us. To you, through your eyes, what was Palestine like as a place?
Palestine was beautiful. We had, 30-something miles of beach, and we had an old city that was thousands of years old. I think it's one of the oldest cities in the world at 4,000 years old, and there's still buildings from that era. There's lots of old mosques, churches, synagogues. It's a beautiful place. They particularly love their trees, so it's covered in trees, fruit trees in particular. There's a lot of mango trees, date trees. There's a lot of custard apple trees, orange trees, and of course olive trees. It's absolutely beautiful to grow up there, and people are wonderful. I remember a lot of happy memories growing up there, really a lot of happy memories. People are very kind and just sound.
Mm-hmm. And why did you leave Palestine?
We left in around 1988. That's when the first intifada broke out, and things got a little bit tipsy-turvy, to say the least. And Mum, being Irish, thought that it might be an opportunity to go back to Ireland and live a better life, because things were getting difficult with the constant oppression by the IDF, the Israeli military. I can tell you some terrible stories that might kind of exemplify the kind of life, the subjugation that people were enduring at that time.
Can you elaborate? Because I think the biggest issue is we don't understand enough of what's going on.
Yeah, from the smallest things to the biggest things. So I remember, for example, my dad and my granddad were in a car going into the souk, into the town to go shopping. And I remember looking out the window. We were stopped in traffic, and there was 2 old men playing chess outside a cafe, and a group of Israeli army guys walked past, and the last guy in the group just tipped over the chessboard and kept walking. And the 2 old men didn't say anything. They just got down on their hands and knees and picked up the chess pieces and kept playing. It was just, I think it just shows you how, not defeated, but just difficult for anybody to say anything or do anything. They can't resist something like that, because it's every day, and the people are kind of humiliated like that in many, many different ways. I remember once in Gaza, the Palestinians were very, very proud that we finally had traffic lights. I think it was the EU that paid for them, actually. We had traffic lights in the city centre. And about 4 or 5 weeks after they were installed, the Israeli tanks rolled in, knocked them all down, and then left again. This kind of thing. It's just, what's the point to that? What did that achieve? Another one was the stadium that was actually close enough to our house, a stadium for playing soccer. It was just finished. They had laid down a kind of a grass field, which was very difficult in a desert environment. But when it was finished, there was a crater from a bomb right on the center spot. It's the little things like that, and of course the big things as well. I remember I went to a school called Nasser School, which is about 15 minutes from our house. My mother was a teacher there, actually an English teacher. This was in the 80s, and the building next door was occupied by the Israeli military for a few weeks, and we knew that as kids. So when the teacher was out of the classroom, we'd draw Palestinian flags in our copybooks and dance in front of the windows. And one time they opened fire at the window and there was bullet holes all around, things like that. So, yeah.
So growing up then, what was your attitude towards Israel?
Fear. I was a little bit different because I spoke English. My mother was Irish. She has red hair. She looked visibly different to everybody else there. I remember actually, now this is from a child's kind of simple logic. I remember walking to school once, holding my mother's hand, and there was a group of army guys walking towards us, Israeli army guys walking towards us. And I said, don't speak English, speak Arabic, because I was so afraid of standing out. I didn't want to be picked out and something happened to us because of that, and that was the logic of a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old. So fear, I think, from the Israeli, I mean, they would raid our home from time to time, as they did with everybody's home.
And who were they looking for then? Because was Hamas a thing back then?
No, Hamas wasn't a thing back then. It was more just to disrupt and, remind you who was in charge, I think. We had nothing to do with politics or militarism or, anything like that. My grandfather was a doctor. My uncle was a businessman. He set up an ice cream factory. My other uncle was in tourism. All of my cousins were kids at the time. We had nothing to do with politics or anything like that. But when they raided our house, they'd come in, push people around and, open a few cupboards and knock a few things over and leave again. And that was everyone was used to it. Everybody, had that kind of experience. We can all tell stories like that. I remember once one of my aunties, she was the funny one. She tried to get a soldier to take off his gun and she told him, sit down, I'll make you a cup of tea, make yourself comfortable. And he got a little bit confused.
Yeah, you see, I think because I've been to Israel, as I told you before, ahead of chatting today, and I got to see both sides of it because I was with Israeli Jews and I was with Palestinian people, and the lifestyle of both of them was completely different. And I can only talk about what I witnessed in my perception, but the Israeli Jewish people that I was with were very, very wealthy. Had the best cars, the best jewelry, really, really good jobs. And I remember being brought to an area, I think it was near Jerusalem at one stage. And from what I can recall, there was like this huge incline in the ground. And when you looked down at the bottom of the hill, there was all these kind of tents and it's like a camping area. And the person pointed to me that that's where the Palestinians are and practically spat to the ground. And then he brought us on this tour where there was like a coffee shop and there was all these bullet holes in the wall. And he said, you see that's what the Palestinians do here. That there was just innocent people having coffee one morning and then that they were just shot at by Palestinian people. And all of his children were conscripted into the Israeli army. And one of them actually lost a leg. And very much his perception of Palestinians was with anger and possibly hatred. And I think when you go through a system where you are conscripted and you are told day in, day out that this is the enemy, that I think when you leave the army a couple of years later, I feel that you are still going to carry that perception of a group of people, whether you've realized that consciously or subconsciously, I think that has been built into your DNA as such. And then I met Palestinian people and I didn't get any sense from them that there was any animosity towards Israelis or towards Jewish people. But what I did find interesting is when they found out where it was from, I said Ireland, they all started chanting, "Hey, hey, IRA, hey, hey, IRA," which I thought was mad. But then they said, no, Irish people, freedom fighters. So that's what they liked about meeting some from Ireland. They considered us freedom fighters over, our war against the British Empire when Ireland was occupied. But very much a simple lifestyle, the most basic type of clothes. There was no show of jewelry or anything like that, but very warm and welcoming people. And in fairness, my time with the Jewish people as well, they were very warm and friendly, but it was just, those few hours in the town being brought around, there was just this huge anger within. I found the whole thing fascinating, meeting both sides.
I think that's part of the indoctrination and I only know this secondhand through friends who are Jewish that I've known for many years, and the type of upbringing that they get, particularly in Israel, is full of kind of fear-based, and they don't really teach hatred. They teach fear, to be afraid, and this kind of otherism of Arabs and Palestinians and Arabs in general. But it's about and the history that's taught is completely contrary to fact and what's documented by the United Nations. They're taught that Israel was attacked by armies left, right, and center, and they should be afraid. Every Palestinian has even children will grow up to be terrorists. They are going to be indoctrinated. They're going to kill you one day. So be afraid of even children. They're not your friend. And when you grow up in that kind of, with that kind of psyche, you're always going to be afraid. You're always going to be fearful. And that, of course, leads to anger. And that leads to what we're seeing today, which is, I think, the end result of years of that kind of education.
Yeah. I mean, what's happening at the moment has been brewing for decades. What were your thoughts on, what was your initial thoughts when the attack took place on October 7th by Hamas?
I thought immediately, a friend of mine texted me. I didn't hear about it until a few hours later. A friend of mine texted me and said, "Did you hear what happened?" And he sent me a link, and I texted him back and I say, "There's going to be huge reprisals. There's going to be a massive bombing campaign that's going to be unleashed on the Palestinian people, and thousands of them are going to die. Of civilians, innocent civilians are going to die because of this. Because an attack of that nature on Israel, the Israeli army made sure that the numbers suffered by the Palestinian side were about 6, 7, 8 times that were suffered by Israel. And that's constant throughout history. That was always the case. If you look at the numbers of deaths for every war, for every attack, you'll see that there's maybe 10 people killed on the Israeli side and maybe 150, 200 people killed on the Palestinian side. Always those kind of reciprocal numbers were always ensured by the Israeli military. So I knew that this was going to be like hell was going to be unleashed. I knew that immediately. And
what's Palestine's relationship then with Hamas? Did they vote in Hamas?
Yeah. So Hamas was, it was an election, a democratic election that was held, I believe, was it around 2003 or 4, or maybe a bit later. And Hamas won the election, surprisingly, because at the time Fatah, the other party, it's the dual party system over there. Fatah is the party that governs in the West Bank, and that set up and founded the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. You might have heard that term being bandied about when Yasser Arafat was alive. He set that up. And Fatah then was originally started off, I think, in the early 80s as a charitable organization, and then it found funding. Actually, Israel funded it for a period of time to split the Palestinian society up. So you'd have Fatah on one side and Hamas on the other, so it would serve as a counterweight. And of course, the philosophy was to divide and conquer. So Israel, and Netanyahu himself has admitted it and said it publicly, that he funded Hamas for that reason. But Hamas then unexpectedly won the elections. They were fully democratic. There was UN observers there to ensure that everything went smoothly. But Fatah was kind of reluctant to relinquish control over their power that they had for so many years. And there was a power struggle in Gaza. Hamas won. Hamas then governed Gaza.
And when you say a power struggle, you talk like a military...
A mini civil war almost, yeah. It only lasted a couple of weeks and it was over, and Fatah had lost, and I think they retreated to the West Bank, and Hamas took over then and governed civil society in the Gaza Strip since then. And since then, Israel has put nearly 20 years of a siege on the Gaza Strip because of that. So, siege means goods and food and any kind of products couldn't come in and or out as easily as before. So there was an economy that was crushed and crippled over the last 20 years. Unemployment rose up to about 65%. The majority of people that were employed by the United Nations, UNRWA and the likes of those kind of organizations. And
this is an organization we've heard of a lot lately, because Israel was saying that UNRWA were involved in the attacks on October 7th.
Well, they said that 12 of the 30,000 employees were they had evidence that they were part of the attack or part of Hamas, but they never produced that evidence. And I know that some journalists from the UK, I think it was BBC or Channel 4 maybe, saw the evidence that they had finally, and they said that there was not evidence at all. Yeah. But the damage was already done. A lot of countries in Europe and the US withdrew their funding for UNRWA, and, knowing that that's the only organization that is feeding the people there that are currently being starved. We'll get to that, I'm sure, in a moment. But it was devastating. It had a terrible impact on what's happening on the ground over there.
What happened on October 7th was absolutely horrific, and the murder that took place there and the people taken hostage. Sadly, there's a lot of people still held hostage, and a lot of people didn't survive their captivity. And that has led to pretty much an obliteration of Gaza over the last 7 months or so. Tens of thousands of people killed.
Yeah. I think it's important to note as well that, hostages are taken on both sides. There's nearly 12,000 hostages, Palestinian hostages in Israeli language in Israeli jails without trial or charges for years at a time. And a lot of them are, a good proportion of them are children under the age of 16. Some of them are under the age of 12. And all of these people, if they are tried in military court. So if you're Jewish or from any other nationality, you're tried in civilian court in Israel. But if you're Palestinian, you're tried in a military court, including children. In fact, Israel is the only country in the world that tries children in military courts and has a 99.9% conviction rate. And the reason the conviction rate is so high is because a lot of the children that are arrested are arrested in the middle of the night, usually 4 a.m. The parents aren't allowed to go with them. There's no lawyers present. The children are subjected to psychological torture. And this has been documented by many of the NGOs working in Palestine. And some of them are subjected to sexual assault. And in fact, there was a sexual assault charge brought against an Israeli soldier who was questioning a Palestinian child. And the very next day, that NGO that was supporting that case was raided, and they were labeled a terrorist organization, and they weren't allowed to perform and they were a children's charity. So there are hostages on both sides, and I understand that what happened on October 7th was terrible. It was an awful thing to happen, but it didn't happen in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
It happened for a reason. 75 to 80% of Hamas fighters are orphans and have been made orphans from the previous wars. The wars where Israel described them as mowing the lawn. So they would regularly, every year or 2 years or every 3 years, they would bomb Gaza and wipe out entire families. And these children grow up, they have nothing left. What else are they going to do? They become what they regard as resistance fighters. So this is where they come from. This is, everybody has a story, and we need to understand both sides of the coin.
But is this not going to get way worse now? Because
Yeah.
I mean, everyone who's still alive in Gaza must have absolute hatred beyond belief now at this stage of what's been done.
I think it's more sadness. It's more sadness for what they've lost. Gaza, like I described at the beginning of this conversation, was a beautiful, beautiful city with miles of coastline, with lots of trees and beautiful restaurants all along the coast, and a beautiful old town with squares and parks. And now it looks nothing like that. It's completely obliterated. It's decimated. It's completely in ruins. Everything, every part of infrastructure has been destroyed, from the hospitals. The hospital that I was born in, the Baptist hospital, is completely destroyed. The school that I used to go to, Nasser School, that was built by the Jordanians and financed by the Jordanians, that's gone. Our house was destroyed, even though it had nothing to do with anything. It was destroyed. The roads outside and around, all roads in the city and along the strip were destroyed. The electricity power plant was destroyed. The water treatment facility was destroyed. There's no running water. Civil society as we know it was completely obliterated, and there's nothing left. But that was the idea. That was the stated aim by the Israeli government at the beginning of this war, was to make Gaza unlivable, to encourage, quote unquote, voluntary emigration.
Mm. It's funny, I was looking at an article that Fintan O'Toole had in the Irish Times today, saying the destruction of Gaza and the starvation of its population has a purpose: to make life so intolerable the Palestinians will have to leave, and then the West Bank will be next.
Yeah, so if you look at the history of Israel after 1948, Israel, believe it or not, have never defined their borders. They've never said this is where our borders are. Why is that? You got to ask yourself, why will they never define? In all of the rounds of negotiations from Camp David, even before that, 1947, Israel refused to define their borders because Israel has been under an expansionist policy since its creation into what is termed by them Eretz Israel, and that simply means Greater Israel. And some Israelis believe that is all the way down to Mecca, Medina in Saudi Arabia, and across to the Levant area, which is modern day Iraq. So that's Eretz Israel. And how far are they going to keep going over the years? And it has been expanding over the years.
And can you explain the different types of beliefs that people have out there from Israel, with your Zionists and so on?
Yeah, so Zionism was a philosophy that was created by Theodor Herzl in the 19th century, so in the late 19th century, 1800s. And that was the philosophy, or the belief was to create a state for the Jewish people. And they had earmarked several countries for this. One of them was, for example, in South America. Another one was in Africa. One was actually given to them by, I think it was Stalin. It was on the very eastern edge of USSR at the time, modern day Russia, on the border with China and Mongolia. And that actually still is the first kind of Israeli state. It's just, an autonomous region of Russia today. And it's predominantly inhabited by Jewish people. But they chose Palestine because at the time it was occupied by the British and called British Mandate Palestine. That was occupied after World War II, around 1917. So you have to kind of understand.
World War One, is it?
Sorry, World War I, 1917. You have to you cannot conflate Zionism with Judaism. They're two very distinct and different things. Judaism is a religion that's thousands of years old, and Zionism is just over 100 years old. And where it gets murky, and deliberately so, is when you start calling all Jews Zionists and all Zionist Jews. They're not. They're very, very different people. In fact, a lot of Zionists are secular, don't believe in Judaism, don't believe in God. Yet God promised them the land, right? Even though they don't believe in God. So
you were talking about your family, and I think it's important for people to understand the structure of the family in Palestine, because here in Ireland, people are spread throughout the island of the country, if not overseas and stuff. In Palestine, you all live in the one tower or the one building.
yeah. So you just imagine a large apartment block or building here in Ireland, and it's inhabited by people, neighbors that you don't even know. In Palestine, that block, that one building, is full of the same family members. So usually you'd have the grandparents living on the ground floor. And as you go up floors, the eldest uncle would go next, the second eldest uncle, all the way up to the top. So as a child, I grew up with, all of my family in one building. My cousins were my friends. We used to play we used to have a lovely garden at the side, and a kind of what we'd call a dunham at the back. And a dunham is just the size of a soccer pitch, that's sandy, and a few olive trees, and we'd make goalposts out of the olive trees. And, that's how we'd grow up. And every week we'd have a kind of a little get together in my grandparents' place, because it was the largest apartment with the big veranda, and we'd have a big meal. Everybody would eat together, and sometimes we'd have guests over from other buildings, other Mushtaha buildings. So, for example, my grandfather's brothers would all have their own buildings, and they'd be close by as well. So we'd go to visit them some weeks. They'd come and visit us. So it was very much a society that revolves around family. A little bit different to things here, I guess. There's still, family is very important in Ireland, I think, more so than, other Western countries like the US. But in Palestine, it's kind of the cornerstone of society. So when one building is bombed, you could wipe out an entire family. And there could be like up to 100 people in one building. And
so the house you grew up in, that has been bombed, hasn't it?
That has been bombed. Yeah, that was bombed last year, late last year, in this latest conflict. And
so they're all displaced now.
Yeah, thankfully, not many people got killed, but some people did get killed. My cousin's 3 children got killed. He wasn't there. His wife was pulled out of the rubble. His father was there. He was pulled out, but he lost his leg. And then later on, his other leg was injured. He lost his other leg. And then he had another operation I just found out last week, and they amputated even further up the leg because he was starting to get gangrene, because there isn't enough medication to fight against antibiotics to fight against disease. And when I spoke to my cousin first, after, because he was in the West Bank for work at the time. And when I spoke to him, he said, "Did you see the photograph that I sent you of my children?" And I said, "Yeah, I did. Did you see how beautiful they were?" And I said, "Yeah, they were very beautiful." So, yeah.
What sort of toll has this had on you personally over the last year now?
It's had quite a deep impact on all of us, really. My mother and sister and brother. It's been very difficult. I have to say, it's very difficult. There's a lot of obviously there's a lot of loss, and you're grieving because a lot of people. 14 members of our family have been killed from our direct family, and then about 30 others from the extended Mushtaha clan. Of course, it's going to affect you because you grew up with these people. They're your best friends growing up. You know them well. You talk to them on the phone. You're Skyping them and all of that. Keeping in contact over the years. And when you hear that the place that you grew up in, where all of your memories, your cherished memories, are held, is now gone, reduced to rubble, and only exists now in your head. That's very, very hard. But it's even more hard when you hear their voices on the other end of the line describing the situation. Because if anybody knows Palestinians, no matter what they're going through, if you ask them how they are, they're always going to say, "Oh, we're all good. Don't worry. We're all fine. We're good. You don't need to worry about us. Aiza, Haja, do you need anything?" No, we're all good. We're all good. Even though things could be really, really dire over there. But for the first time, they've been saying things are really terrible right now. And that means that it's so difficult right now that they're saying that they're telling the truth about it. It is difficult for all of us, yeah, but nowhere near as difficult as it is for them.
What scenarios are they describing that they're having to face at the moment?
Oh man, it's been changing over the last 6 months since this started. At the beginning, we've been getting voice notes from cousins and family over there, describing their movements and where they are. I feel like they were trying to kind of tell somebody in the outside world where their last spot was in case something happened. And I remember one particular voice note came from a cousin of mine who's got herself and her husband. Her husband stayed with parents or something, and she was taking the kids down south on foot. All the roads were destroyed, so there's no cars that can travel. It's just all by foot now. But she was trapped between bombs dropping on both sides of her, and she sent this voicemail as a kind of a last kind of message. And you could hear the drones. Every single voicemail that we get from them, you can hear the drones overhead. All of the voicemails, always drones buzzing about overhead. And that has a psychological impact as well. But that particular one, I think she was crying. It was heartbreaking because I think she felt like it was the last time that she'd get to send a message, because she was going to die. But thankfully she survived that, and she made it down south. Thankfully.
Yeah, and what about, there's lots of report that aid trucks aren't getting in, or enough, there's aid there, but enough of the aid isn't getting across to the people who need it. People are starving. There's lack of medical supplies.
Yeah. So the hospitals have all run out. One of my uncles owns a chain of pharmacies, and he ran out of medicine a long, long time ago. He was actually short before this even happened on the 7th of October, because of the blockade and siege of Gaza. There's no anesthetic for operations, so children are being operated on when they're fully conscious and aware. They've had amputations. I remember one story, a doctor had to amputate his own daughter's leg on the kitchen table without anesthetic, and her brothers were holding her down, and I can just imagine the pain that she was experiencing. But the thing is, and this is the bizarre thing, it's very easy to get food and supplies to them. There are, I think, 8 crossings altogether from Israel and from south across the Rafah crossing from Egypt. 8 of them in total. And they can get in and out with military equipment. They can get in and out with equipment to build this new pier that they're building in North Gaza. And that's no problem. So why is it a problem to let the aid trucks in? You know? So when, again, we have to go back, and to find a reason for this, we have to go back and try and understand the logic for what's happening in this war from the Israeli side. And it's the first time, and I'm going to call this a genocide because it is a genocide. It's the first time a genocide has been documented in this way. And one of the major elements in proving a genocide case at the International Court of Justice is intent. It's very difficult to prove intent, but this time it's very easy because the Israeli politicians have said it publicly on Israeli media that they intend to obliterate and destroy and ethnically cleanse the people of Gaza. So the intent is there. So that's why the food and aid trucks haven't been allowed in from the Israeli crossings, even though they could easily. And that's why there's a starvation happening right now for hundreds of thousands of people in North Gaza, and for nearly 1.5 million in the south. So especially in the north, though, they've had nothing. And I've got cousins up there. I've got Bashar, I've got Nida, I've got Baha is up there. I've got my uncle Sami is up there, who lost his legs. And all of them are starving. They have nothing to eat. They are eating grass. They're eating donkey fodder, which is so humiliating, like animal feed. It's brutal. It is absolutely brutal what's happening. There's children dying of starvation. And the thing is, though, even if food was allowed in now, because famine has already started, you cannot just eat.
Yeah.
You cannot just eat because your stomach has been empty for so long. You can't just start eating because that would actually kill you. So the reverberations of this is going to go on for a very long time, and there's going to be so many more deaths over the next 6 to 12 months, even if this kind of finished now.
Yeah. And what do your family want, your family that are over there now, what do they want to do? Like, do they just want to get out of Gaza completely at this stage?
So, well, the problem is everything has been destroyed. The fabric of society has been decimated. There's no, like I mentioned before, there's no schools, there's no hospitals, there's no infrastructure anymore. There's nowhere to live. It's essentially a desert with a few structures that have been partly demolished. That's all that's left. And 2.3 million people. A lot of them want to leave. That was the point. But a lot of them want to stay as well because they refuse to be ethnically cleansed. Like my uncle said to me, I asked him, would you not leave? Because he's so old now. He's nearly 80. And I'd love for him to get like treatment because he's got sucker. What do you call that in English? It's what's the sugar disease? Diabetes.
Yeah.
He's got diabetes, and he hasn't had medication for quite a while. And I was saying to him, would you not want to go to try and get out? Maybe we can try and get you out, get to Egypt. And he said, if I leave now, I'll never be allowed back, and my children will never be allowed back, because this is what happened before. It happened in 1948 and it happened in 1967. The people that were ethnically cleansed back then were never allowed back. So that's what his biggest fear is. And a lot of people are thinking that way now over there, because they understand that this was the reason this was done. So they're afraid to leave.
The other thing which I haven't really seen documented much is, if over 2 million Palestinians leave Gaza and they head into the Middle East and into Europe, like the knock-on effect that is going to have. I mean, you can see the anger growing in Ireland now with refugees coming in, and there's places being burnt down. And, it was all great and rosy at the start where people, saw that we were supporting those fleeing a war, and now that attitude just slightly changed a bit. What's going to happen when there's millions of people coming across the mainlands there, looking for accommodation, looking for work, looking for housing and schools, and from the powers that be, that this seems to be acceptable to just have this mass and I'm not even talking about the devastation taking place. I'm talking about the knock-on effect of that this will have for the people who possibly don't care too much about it at the moment, but it will have massive effects on the rest of the world.
This is the one thing that I never could understand. I mean, all the wars that have happened in the Middle East since the early 90s, the first Gulf War in 92 onwards, have decimated entire populations. And what's going to happen to those populations that are displaced? Of course, they're going to try and find a better life. And where do they go for a better life? They go what they see, the roads are paved with gold. Let's go to Europe. Let's go to London. Let's go to Ireland. Why would we support a war that ends with that results in that? America's fine. They're sitting dandy on the other side of the Atlantic. They're not going to be troubled by, immigration and refugees. They're leading the war.
Well, they're building walls against the Mexicans.
Against the Mexicans, yeah. But, they're not bombing Mexico either, but they'd happily bomb the countries around Europe's doorstep because they're not going to suffer the consequences of that in terms of refugees. So why would Europe, especially like Germany, because they've had a lot of integration issues with Turkish immigrants over generations from the 60s on. Germany had a very low birth rate at the time, and they needed a workforce to work in their heavy industries. And the Turks that immigrated there served a purpose, but it created divisions in society, and so Germany has experienced that before. Why would they want the same thing to happen? And look at Greece. It's inundated with refugees from Africa, not just the Middle East. Look at Italy. So it's not just Ireland that's experiencing that, but I never could understand why we would, as a European Union, go and support wars all around the world, knowing full well that in 3, 4, 5 years' time, we're going to have huge influxes of refugees resulting from those wars.
Yeah. You set up, and this is really when I first started to hear your story, a charity event, I suppose, a fundraiser, Walk for Gaza, with yourself, your sister and your brother, to raise funds here in Ireland where you could then send money over to your family members in Gaza. And like, you've raised about nearly €50,000, which is amazing, but €50,000 in Ireland is different in Gaza. We might see Gaza right now as an impoverished place, but when there's war on as well, everything costs a lot more money. Tell me about coming to the decision to set up the fundraiser and what that money has done for your family.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say that we're so grateful. It's testament to the generosity of the Irish people. We've been, inundated with well wishes and people calling us, letting us know that they support us and stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And we see it every Saturday on the streets marching. The crowds are getting larger, and the people, ordinary people that are, pushing their prams, marching in solidarity with the Palestinian people, is heartwarming, to say the least. But we decided to set up a GoFundMe page called Adam, Laura and Durgham Walk for Gaza. And if you're looking for that, just type in Adam Walk for Gaza. You'll probably get that. I won't ask you to spell my name. But, we have raised nearly 50,000, and we are grateful, really grateful. The money's gone. The money's gone because it costs about $100 a day to feed a family of 4 over there now. things are so expensive. I mean, you're saying that, I know people are saying that rent in Dublin is expensive. It's more expensive in Gaza because, 65% of the buildings have been destroyed. All the residential dwellings have all but gone. So the ones that are left are crowded, and you could pay up to $1,000 to share a room with other families per month. So you could be, there could be 25, 30 people in a room, and otherwise you're going to be in a bombed out building, or you're going to be in a tent. And the tents are awful because there's no ground sheet, so you're literally sleeping on the wet sand if it rains. So it's expensive now to live there. Like a clove of garlic, it could be like $2 or $3 for just a clove of garlic, if you come by it. But it's very difficult to come by food, of course. But if you do come by it, you're going to pay for it. So the money has gone. I think I've got like €200 left. So yeah, we are in need. I know we've asked a lot already from the Irish people, but I'm hoping that, their generosity continues until at least the war is over, so that we can get them through this. We've got about 100 people that we're taking care of. All Mushtahas, cousins, uncles, cousins' children, their children's children. There's a lot of people that we're kind of looking after. So,
and how does the money work in the sense of, how like the aid trucks aren't getting in? How do you get the money to them?
Yeah.
And what can they do physically with that money?
So it was actually difficult at the start, but it's gotten a lot easier. So at the start, we were doing Western Union transfers. This was even before we set up the GoFundMe. We were just, sending our own money that we've saved up over the years. But the Western Union office that we were sending it to was bombed. That was in Khan Yunis, and it was terribly sad because there was a long line of people queuing outside. There was like a 2-day long line, and a lot of people died in that bombing. So we've been doing, at the beginning, we tried Bank of Ireland to Bank of Palestine. That proved difficult. Then we tried AIB. AIB has actually managed to get to get the money across.
So AIB have managed to get funds into Palestine for you.
Yeah, but there's very little liquidity now left in the country. So, which means there's no like cash, right? So when we're sending money over, they have to transfer that to what's called a middleman, or like an exchange of sorts, right? And they will take a huge cut out of it because there's nobody left with cash. So they will take up to 10%. So altogether, after the GoFundMe 2.9%, the bank charges, the 10% for the middlemen, we'd be losing in and around 15 to 16% altogether. But look, it's the best we can do, and they need it, and that's what we have to do. So we try and get them the money when we have it. But like I say, the money is run out now, so I don't really.
What do they do with that money? Like, where can there's no shopping centres around?
No, there's no shopping centres. No. So there is a black market. So there's food that is, like, for example, grown in the area for whatever, even a fruit. If somebody can find has a fruit tree, a mango or whatever, that could go for like $50. So whatever people have or whatever they can get their hands on is going to cost an absolute fortune because there's so little of it, right? So they need the money to do that. And if somebody is selling something, that means they might have like a tree that in their back garden, or it might, they might have had a chicken that they butchered, or even a dog or a donkey. I've heard of people butchering a donkey and selling the meat, feeding themselves first, but they can't, there's no refrigerator, so they have to sell the meat. Okay. So they're trying to make more money so that they can buy like something else, right? So it's a kind of a black market because the economy has collapsed. There's nothing left. Yeah.
Raising funds over the last number of months, have you in any way faced intimidation or been threatened?
There's a couple of messages on social media here and there, but we don't take any notice of that. There's no point kind of dwelling on people like that are very, how would you describe them? Like closed-minded kind of people that, I don't know. We just ignore them. We don't want to kind of deal with that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
So we blocked kind of comments on our social media messages and that kind of thing. So
Yeah, it's such a tricky area to have a discussion on, because what I'm trying to do with our discussion here today is just kind of give people a little bit more background on, what Gaza was like pre-October 7th, even going back to the 80s, what's happening now, and just get the human story from someone who's actually directly related to people who are over there at the moment. But it can become so black and white with certain people there as well, like even with a speech that was made at the Oscars by a director. And,
a Jewish director.
Yeah, and over 400 people in Hollywood signed this petition against him. And like some of the names on it are well-known, filmmakers and actors and so on. And I was amazed at how angry they were towards him, whereas I thought it was so important in what he was saying in his speech, and how just things have changed in the last, 70 years or so. And yeah, unfortunately, it's an area that has to be discussed so carefully, because for some people, it's so black and white. They don't see the gray. They don't see just the human story. There was a line there in a movie recently that came out with Jake Gyllenhaal and Conor McGregor, and Conor McGregor said his favorite line in the movie is, "There's never a winner in a fight, and there's never a winner in war either. No matter what the books like to write, whatever the Congress like to say at the end, no one ever wins." And unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a clear end in sight. Even if there's an immediate ceasefire, there's still so many repercussions.
Well, you see, the thing is, I feel like things have changed this time around. I've been experiencing these wars for a very, very long time, from a very young child. And this time it feels a little bit different, because, Israel has flouted 65 United Nations resolutions calling for an end to apartheid, calling for refugees to return, calling for a withdrawal of occupation troops, calling to lift the siege, calling to take accountability for the massacres that happened in 1982 and 67 or 68. But they flouted every single one, even though these are binding internationally legal resolutions. But this time round, things feel different, because finally people are more aware of what's happening over there. People are calling it out, because before it was regarded as intractable, it was too complex, too difficult to understand. And people are starting to realize that it's not actually. This is an apartheid regime. This is an occupation. This is a subjugation of some people over the lives of others. And the result is constant war, constant hardship and death on one side, while the others have swimming pools and nightclubs and bars and beautiful restaurants and beaches and good lives, So,
and those supplying the weapons for these wars are also
laughing all the way to the bank. But this time around, with social media and the massacres playing out on people's handheld screens, people can see it for what it is now. And I feel like it's changed a lot this time around. The majority of people, and especially coming from the Jewish people, some of my friends in the US who are Jewish, who are younger than me and my age as well, who are saying, the predominant feeling right now amongst the Jewish population in the US, because that's where it really matters, because of the power that the US has in the world, that has changed. It has flipped. and they're going against what their parents, the last generation, they wouldn't hear of any criticism of Israel. If you criticized Israel, you are an anti-Semite, even though you're trying to, separate the Israeli administration from the Jewish people. It's nothing to do with each other. They're not one and the same. But any criticism of one would label you an anti-Semite. Incidentally, this is, I guess, a little regarded fact. The word Semite just is a label for a group of languages that includes Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, right? So, and a couple of others, but that's what Semite is. So the people that speak those languages are all Semite. So I'm a Semite, right? Okay. I'm a Semite because being a Palestinian. Jewish people from Israel are Semites. We're all Semites, but anyway, if you're labeling somebody an anti-Semite and they're like, well, actually I'm a Semite. So, But anyway, I think I know what they mean. But the idea is to knock somebody, take the legs out from under them for saying anything at all negative against a government for inflicting harm on a population like the Palestinians. And once you label them, that's it. They're ostracized. These things happen and people are afraid to speak out. But there has been a turn in the tide, and I feel that people are more inclined to speak out now than they were before. They're not afraid anymore. Because
even I know the guy involved in the Web Summit, Cosgrove, had to step down 6 months ago. He's back now, CEO, over comments he had made, which again was something similar where, he wasn't saying he wasn't blaming anyone, but it was more that the hardships of the people. And it's amazing how we are being, people have nothing got to do with it, but even to have the conversation or to make a statement where it's like, we don't see anyone harmed, hurt, oppressed, how we're all being muted or there's attempts to mute us. How open and free are we in society? How democratic is all this when, your social media accounts can be deleted or blocked, or you have to step down from your organization because all your sponsors pull away. And, we need, so much can be solved. That's why they call them ceasefire talks. So much can be solved by people just sitting down, talking, saying, look, this is my point of view. Now let me hear your point of view. And that discussions happen, and the black and the white becomes a little bit grayer, and that there's understanding then that takes place. Obviously there's hurt, obviously there's anger. But if we keep muting each other, that doesn't solve the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the fear before was the reprisals of speaking out. And especially in Ireland, I don't think, people in Ireland are afraid of that. People, I'm lucky to be half Irish, I think, because of, our history here in Ireland and our own kind of fight against oppression and colonialism. So people have an understanding of what it's like to be in that situation. And they've got more of an affinity with the Palestinians because of that. And because of that, they're not afraid to say what it is and to call it out. So I'm lucky to have that here. But I think a lot of people in other countries, particularly in the US, in the UK now, in Germany, they don't have that privilege. They don't have that freedom of speech that we enjoy here. If you do speak out, then there is a real chance that you would lose your job or, be arrested and charged. Who knows, you'd be ostracized from society for speaking out. So yeah, it's thankfully things are changing.
And in fairness, there are a lot of people as well in Israel who are saying they're not happy at the moment with what their government is at, so it's not that everything is one-sided there either. There are people there seeing what's happening and they don't want this either. Most people in this world, I would think, don't want it.
Yeah. Thankfully, reason prevails and, the people can think for themselves and their gut instinct and what their heart says kind of outweighs what mainstream media might say to them. So,
well, look, I encourage people to continue to educate themselves on this. And I myself have been guilty of not opening up the news articles or looking at the images because it's too horrific, and especially when you see stories about children. And I've children myself. It plays in the back of your head, and you don't want to go down that road. But I think we just need to continue to educate ourselves and converse with all sides and create a better understanding. And if people can in any way support your fundraising initiative, they just need to go to the GoFundMe website and look for Adam Walk for Gaza and they should be able to get it.
And can I just say as well that I know it's probably difficult to do at times when, in our busy schedules, but it would help a lot if people actually took to social media and posted, even the smallest thing like I support Palestine, or what's happening is genocide, or whatever it is that your opinion is. Say it on social media, because it does help. You're giving voice to the voiceless over there, the people that are charging their phones on car batteries to try and get a bit of reception to get the news out. Some of them can't, a lot of them can't. So you are their voice. So it would help a lot if you kind of used it and spoke up for us. Thank you.
Durgham, thanks for coming in the studio.
Thanks very much, Garry.